In the vast, boundless reaches of the galaxy, whispers of Terran space traveled far and wide, soft-spoken warnings, veiled legends, and the rare first-hand accounts from those lucky enough to survive it. To many, these were cautionary tales, dismissed as exaggerations or the fearful mutterings of minor traders. After all, what real threat could humans pose? They were just another curious species, no different from any other new race finding its place in the universe. And to a casual observer, they seemed charmingly naive, almost amusingly so. Small in stature and technologically behind many advanced empires, they radiated a unique curiosity and warmth. Diplomats, merchants, and explorers alike found humans friendly, welcoming, and dare they say, adorably harmless. For an ambitious alien species like the Zarnax Empire, the humans appeared as soft targets. The Zarnax, driven by conquest and expansion, had heard the rumors but saw them as little more than fanciful myths. Humans, they believed, were ripe for an easy subjugation, their territories prime for the taking. This assessment wasn't unique. Several lesser empires and alliances saw Terran space as the final frontier, an untapped resource guarded only by a species they perceived as harmless. For the Zarnax, it seemed like the ideal opportunity to expand their reach without the resistance they'd met from other advanced societies. What was one more small species on their list of conquests? The decision was made quickly. A scouting vessel was sent first, a small contingent of soldiers and scientists, tasked with testing human boundaries and gauging the true nature of this peculiar species. As the ship entered the outer rim of Terran space, the crew noted the calm, unassuming appearance of the human patrols. Ships were small, sleek, and modestly armed, and their pilots seemed cheerful, curious even, waving enthusiastically at the Zarnax vessel. To the Zarnax, it felt almost patronizing, as if the humans didn't understand the gravity of their presence. The Zarnax commander scoffed. It was like entering the territory of children, innocent and oblivious to the dangers they could provoke. After minimal resistance, they captured a human diplomat, a young officer who had come aboard to offer them a warm welcome and a round of food and drink. He was calm, polite, and showed no signs of fear, even as he was surrounded by towering Zarnax soldiers. It was amusing to them. Here was a perfect example of human naivete, as they interpreted it, a diplomat casually strolling onto an alien ship without a single weapon in hand, as if he were hosting a party. The officer explained Terran customs, asking questions and listening attentively to their responses. The Zarnax grew tired of his chatter, eventually silencing him and taking him as their first prize, a token to bring back to their empire, a demonstration of human weakness. What the Zarnax didn't know was that the humans had been watching them the entire time. While the Zarnax scouted, shadowy human vessels tailed their every move, gathering data silently and relaying it back to Earth. This was no random encounter, no harmless diplomatic gesture. The humans were testing them, analyzing their strengths and weaknesses, but they didn't reveal this. They maintained their facade of friendliness, seemingly oblivious to the danger, as the Zarnax misinterpreted human openness as incompetence. The humans responded with a single, measured message, asking for the safe return of their diplomat. There was no anger in the tone, only a carefully worded request. The Zarnax, bemused by the audacity, ignored it entirely. Emboldened, they sent a second vessel and then a small fleet, positioning themselves just outside Earth's reach, poised to begin their conquest. To them, it seemed like humanity was too naive or weak to retaliate. But then something peculiar began to happen. Their communications started to cut out sporadically, jamming devices malfunctioned, and their navigational equipment grew unsteady, subtly nudging them off course. Frustrated, the Zarnax attempted to correct the errors, assuming it was some form of technical glitch. Yet the disruptions persisted, increasing in frequency and intensity. Each time they attempted to adjust their systems, something new went wrong, slowly but surely wearing down their resources and patience. Meanwhile, human ships continued to shadow them, silent and observant. And still, the humans hadn't attacked, hadn't raised a single weapon. The Zarnax grew irritated with the useless humans, mistaking their patient approach for fear. Little did they know that they were the ones being lured into a carefully crafted web, their every move anticipated and countered without a single shot being fired. Human strategy, as subtle and measured as it was, started to feel more like a game of cat and mouse than the naive bumbling the Zarnax had originally expected. When the Zarnax commander finally grew impatient and initiated an assault, what awaited them was far from what they'd anticipated. Human ships, which they'd dismissed as small and underpowered, suddenly transformed into a wall of firepower, their movements precise and relentless. Each human vessel moved with a deadly elegance, weaving through the Zarnax fleet, striking with pinpoint accuracy. The Zarnax ships, massive but lumbering, struggled to keep up with the speed and maneuverability of the Terran defenses. They'd been so focused on human appearances that they'd failed to consider the possibility of hidden technologies, innovative tactics, and relentless strategy. What they had assumed were minor technical disruptions were in fact coordinated jamming efforts and countermeasures, human engineers quietly exploiting every weakness in the Zarnax systems. Each attempt the Zarnax made to communicate with reinforcements was intercepted, scrambled, or redirected, rendering them isolated and vulnerable. One by one, Zarnax ships found themselves cut off, stranded, and surrounded by a fleet that seemed to grow in strength and ferocity with each passing second. The Zarnax forces were pushed back, battered and disoriented, yet there was no call for surrender. No offer of mercy. Only silence from the Terran side as their ships advanced. It was here, in this moment of desperation, that the Zarnax realized the true nature of the humans they had dismissed. They saw a species that valued peace yet was willing to unleash unmatched fury when its borders were crossed. It wasn't anger or hatred driving them, but a protective instinct, uncompromising and devastating. In the final moments of the encounter, as the few surviving Zarnax ships limped back toward the edges of Terran space, a transmission from the humans finally came through. Short, simple, and chilling in its restraint, the message echoed across the Zarnax ships. Return what is ours, or prepare for worse. No bravado, no rage, just a warning, spoken with a calm that felt colder than any war cry. The Zarnax finally grasped the duality of humanity, a blend of compassion and calculated might that defied simple categorization. They had made the mistake of underestimating a species that wore its kindness on its sleeve but wielded its strength with unmatched precision when required. As the Zarnax limped back to their homeworld, they carried with them the tales of Terran space and the species that inhabited it, a race that extended friendship before enmity, peace before war, and mercy before vengeance. They learned that day that humanity was far from harmless. They had misinterpreted human warmth as weakness, and in doing so, had unwittingly provoked the fierce protectors of Terran space. What had once seemed cute and harmless was now a reminder that the galaxy's most unassuming species could be its most unpredictable. And so the stories spread. Throughout alien societies, among diplomats, and in the halls of empires, the legend of Terran space grew. Cautionary tales multiplied, each one more embellished than the last, but all sharing the same moral: humanity was kind, even welcoming, until it wasn't. As word of the Zarnax defeat began to filter through the galaxy, many alien factions listened in shock and disbelief. Humans had always appeared unassuming and mild-mannered, even endearing to those who interacted with them. Trade routes with Terran space were often free of conflict, and humans, generally polite and diplomatic, had never shown the slightest desire for expansion or aggression. Yet this encounter with the Zarnax Empire had revealed a side of humanity that few believed existed, a side that could engage in calculated, cold precision without a hint of fear. But as news spread, questions arose. Who exactly were the humans, and what lay within the boundaries of their carefully guarded space? Curiosity, as it often did, turned dangerous. Ignoring the Zarnax warnings and convinced that humanity's defense was a rare fluke, other alien factions began planning their own tests of human resilience, assuming that perhaps the Zarnax had simply made a mistake. The Crown, a technologically advanced empire known for its mastery of psychological warfare, was the next to attempt an incursion. Unlike the Zarnax, the Crown didn't view humans as weak, they simply assumed they could outsmart them. The Crown's approach was more nuanced. Instead of sending a direct assault, they attempted to infiltrate Terran space with cloaked ships, probing at human defenses and relaying back intelligence on military installations, infrastructure, and notably, human communications. They were fascinated by the emotional openness of human messages and the seemingly open channels used for internal dialogue. The Crown believed they had found a vulnerability, something to exploit, a level of transparency that made humans easy to understand, easy to manipulate. Intercepting human broadcasts, they began transmitting carefully crafted messages to simulate distress signals from supposed Allied ships. Each message was meticulously constructed to seem like a call for help, a cry from another species in dire need of aid. The Crown intended to see if humanity would abandon caution in the face of a moral dilemma. After all, humans had earned a reputation for compassion, a weakness the Crown felt confident they could exploit. If they could lure human ships out under the pretense of a rescue, they'd expose Terran fleet movements, defense protocols, and potentially open pathways deeper into human space. To the Crown's delight, human ships did respond. Upon receiving distress calls, human fleets mobilized with an urgency that seemed to confirm the Crown's assessment. But as the humans approached the coordinates given in the Crown's fake transmissions, they did something unexpected. They halted, scanning and probing the region far more thoroughly than anticipated. A cautious dialogue ensued, with human ships broadcasting questions, verifying information, and then, to the Crown's surprise, maneuvering back toward Terran space instead of rushing headlong into the supposed rescue. The Crown observed as the humans coordinated silently among their ships, adjusting positions in real time, without openly revealing any specific intentions. What initially seemed like a hasty, empathetic response to a cry for help transformed into a methodical, cautious operation. The humans probed deeper, accessing their own network of satellites and patrol routes, even reaching out to a nearby friendly race to cross-verify the distress signals. It became clear that the humans weren't blindly trusting, they were testing, analyzing every variable and ensuring no stone was left unturned. When the Crown realized their plan wasn't working, they decided to accelerate their strategy, deploying a second wave of ships disguised as civilian craft in an attempt to bypass human checkpoints. This time, however, the humans didn't merely respond with increased scans. They actively moved to intercept the disguised ships with an aggression the Crown hadn't anticipated. Human ships, once positioned defensively along known patrol routes, shifted to surround the supposed civilian crafts with tactical precision, effectively cornering the Crown vessels. The Crown ships, unable to reveal themselves without risking diplomatic repercussions, were forced into a silent standoff. Human captains began transmitting demands, requesting identification, proof of origin, and purpose. The Crown, trapped and unable to respond without blowing their cover, attempted to withdraw. But by then, the humans had figured out their game. Communications relays along Terran space began relaying one simple message across all channels. No unauthorized ships will be tolerated. Trespassers will be treated as hostile. The Crown, unnerved, found themselves ensnared in a tense gridlock, held in check by human forces unwilling to fire but equally unwilling to let them proceed. Eventually, with no options left and their mission compromised, the Crown abandoned the operation, their supposed covert infiltration and utter failure. As they slunk back into their territory, the Crown High Command was forced to reassess the humans entirely. What they had believed was naivete turned out to be a formidable mix of caution, intelligence, and discipline, a pattern that had escaped their initial assessment. They had vastly underestimated human resolve and their willingness to act decisively in the face of manipulation. The Crown defeat echoed throughout neighboring territories, and humanity's reputation became increasingly enigmatic. Diplomats from various alliances tried to gauge the true nature of humans, exchanging rumors in hushed tones. No one was certain whether the humans were truly peaceful, hiding a deadly edge, or merely unpredictable. But the galaxy's collective interest in Terran space only grew. The Scorned Dominion, a coalition of fiercely militaristic species with a brutal history of conquest, saw the Zarnax and Crown failures as embarrassments, displays of weakness that only reflected poorly on their respective empires. To them, humanity was a challenge waiting to be met, a territory filled with potential resources. Unlike the Crown, the Scorn had no interest in subtlety or psychological tactics. They respected force and saw no need to mask their intentions. For them, strength was the only currency, and their fleets moved openly into Terran space, transmitting one clear message: submit or be destroyed. Human leaders, watching the broadcast from Scorn Dominion command ships, responded quickly, but not with panic or frantic mobilization. Instead, they issued a single statement, sent back across open channels for all the galaxy to hear. Terran space is sovereign. Those who enter uninvited will find no mercy. The statement lacked any trace of fear or hesitation, and it resonated with an authority that the Scorn hadn't expected. It was a direct challenge, a message as bold and unyielding as the Scorn themselves. And so, the Scorn fleets surged forward undeterred. They entered Terran space with weapons hot, positioning their most elite warships along the fringes of Earth's outer colonies. But humanity, ready and vigilant, had already anticipated this move. Their defenses, initially unseen, emerged from hidden positions, flanking the Scorn's ships with relentless precision. Human vessels employed tactics that exploited every weakness in the Scorn's formation, rendering their numerical advantage meaningless. As the battle raged, Scorn's ships fell one by one, their mighty fleet collapsing under the onslaught. Human captains commanded their fleets with a calm, deliberate focus, never hesitating, each order delivered as though it were preordained. To the Scorn, the humans' reaction seemed almost eerie, calculating, emotionless, as if they were facing not individuals but a single, unified force that operated with a purpose beyond mere defense. At the height of the conflict, human forces pushed the Scorn back toward the boundaries of Terran space. But instead of stopping there, they pursued, pressing deeper into Scorn-controlled sectors in a move that shook the entire Dominion. What began as a defense turned into a counter-assault, a reminder that humanity was more than capable of taking the fight beyond their borders when provoked. Finally, after suffering massive losses and with their supply lines stretched thin, the Scorn Dominion ordered a retreat. Human forces halted at the border, withdrawing with the same cold efficiency with which they had advanced. The message was clear: humanity was a force to be reckoned with, not simply in defense, but in sheer willingness to retaliate when necessary. With each incursion rebuffed, and each aggressive power beaten back, the galaxy learned that the image of humanity as weak and harmless was nothing more than a comforting myth. They saw a species that could be both compassionate and fierce, diplomatic yet ruthless when cornered. A species whose boundaries were protected not by desperation or fear, but by an unshakable resolve and a mastery of tactics that left even the most seasoned conquerors in awe. Humanity, it was becoming clear, was a paradox. They extended friendship, sought peace, and embraced cooperation. But those who mistook their goodwill for weakness, who ventured uninvited into Terran space, found that beneath the friendly exterior lay a silent power, a power that defended its own with unmatched ferocity. After the Scorn Dominion's retreat, a silence settled across the galaxy, with factions watching, waiting to see if humanity would push forward or simply hold their ground. The rapid victories over both the Crown infiltration and the Scorn's brutal assault left an impression that could not be ignored. For the first time in recent history, the galaxy's various empires found themselves united, not in alliance, but in a collective respect and fear for the Terran resolve. This reverberated deeply, as new intelligence reports circulated among high-ranking officials across diverse governments, each documenting the humans' tactical capabilities, response speed, and a level of precision that suggested a species long familiar with conflict, despite their peaceful presentation. One faction, however, saw a unique opportunity amid the growing caution: the Consortium, a coalition of species focused on trade and diplomacy. Unlike the militaristic Scorn or the scheming Crown, the Consortium had always valued negotiation over conquest and information over weaponry. They observed humanity's reactions closely, noting that the Terran people had chosen not to pursue the retreating Scorn into deeper territories once the threat had been neutralized. This restrained response struck the Consortium as unusual. They theorized that humanity's restraint might be indicative of a desire for stability rather than dominance, a potential foothold for peaceful relations. Testing this theory, the consortium made the unprecedented decision to approach Terran officials directly, arranging the first formal interstellar conference with humanity. As representatives from each species convened, the atmosphere was electric. The consortium, famed for their neutrality, brought forth an offer, a treaty that would formalize humanity's sovereignty, protect Terran space from future incursions, and create structured trade routes between human and consortium territories. For humanity, this was the diplomatic acknowledgement they had been waiting for, a statement to the galaxy that Terran space was not to be taken lightly. However, for the consortium, this was more than a treaty. It was a strategic move, securing access to humanity's technology and potentially lucrative trade partnerships. The Terran representatives, however, didn't simply accept the offer. They dissected every clause, asking precise questions and clarifying intentions behind each term. The consortium negotiators, accustomed to dealing with straightforward demands or grudging concessions, were taken aback by the depth of humanity's foresight. Human officials sought assurances not only for territorial respect but also for clauses that would protect their allies, environmental agreements to prevent resource exploitation, and even cultural protections that seemed oddly sentimental to the more pragmatic consortium. It was during these discussions that humanity's values became glaringly apparent to the consortium delegates. Humans seemed deeply invested in not only securing peace but ensuring that every aspect of this peace would benefit all involved parties. This philosophy, however alien to some, began to resonate with a few members of the consortium delegation, who found it both refreshing and, paradoxically, a potential sign of human overconfidence. Would humanity uphold these ideals if pressured? Or was this insistence on altruism merely a facade for more strategic ends? In the midst of finalizing negotiations, however, a crisis struck. The Alvarax, a rogue faction known for piracy, violence, and general lawlessness, learned of the conference and decided to disrupt it. The Alvarax had grown in notoriety for exploiting neutral grounds and ambushing diplomatic vessels, seeing no value in peace or order. For them, the conference was a perfect target, an opportunity to assert dominance and sow chaos. Within hours of the conference's start, Alvarax warships surrounded the venue's orbital platform, jamming all external communication and issuing a single message: surrender or be obliterated. Inside the conference halls, panic erupted among the delegates. While consortium officials scrambled to negotiate, it became clear that the Alvarax had no interest in dialogue. They issued ultimatums, counting down to open fire while consortium guards attempted to organize a desperate evacuation. Amidst the chaos, the human representatives remained calm, assessing the situation with a level-headedness that surprised the other delegates. The lead human representative, a seasoned diplomat, quietly contacted the Terran fleet station just outside the agreed-upon neutral zone, issuing orders that were barely audible amid the confusion. There were no impassioned speeches, no gestures of grand bravado, just a short, precise exchange. As the Alvarax ships prepared to launch their first volley, the Terran fleet appeared, emerging from warp in perfect formation, boxing in the Alvarax ships from all directions. What followed was not a battle, but an exhibition of military precision. The Terran vessels deployed calculated strikes that disabled the Alvarax weapons systems with minimal damage to the surrounding area. In less than an hour, the once feared Alvarax fleet was immobilized, stripped of its capabilities without a single loss on the Terran side. Human ships then took up defensive positions around the conference platform, sending a single, unencrypted message to the Alvarax. "You will leave peacefully, or you will leave permanently." This show of restrained force stunned everyone present. It was an undeniable demonstration of human capability and control, a signal to all that humanity was not only prepared to protect its own interests, but also those of its allies. The Alvarax, known for their ruthlessness, found themselves without options. They abandoned their siege, leaving Terran space entirely. As their ships warped away, the message was clear: humanity would not tolerate threats to peace, not just for themselves, but for anyone they engaged with diplomatically. The consortium delegates, watching the swift resolution of the crisis, were left with a newfound respect and caution regarding humanity. The Terran representatives had displayed a calm that bordered on unsettling, a precision that defied expectations. The consortium realized that humanity was not merely a passive or reactionary force. They were active protectors of their space and their allies, and they wielded power with a level of self-control rarely seen in other species. The conference resumed, but the tone had shifted. The delegates knew that humanity was unlike any faction they had encountered before, a force whose loyalty and discipline might change the entire structure of interstellar relations. In the days that followed, the treaty was signed with resounding support, the consortium agreeing to Terran terms without hesitation. And as word of the Alvarax incident spread, other factions began to take heed. Humanity was a species that could wield terrifying strength with deliberate restraint. They had shown they could handle crises with efficiency, channeling power not for domination, but for the preservation of a peace they clearly valued deeply. This quality, this almost paradoxical blend of compassion and lethal capability, made them a force that no one in the galaxy could afford to underestimate. As trade routes opened and diplomatic ties strengthened, whispers spread through the galaxy. Humanity, a species that could be charmingly mild one moment and unflinchingly severe the next, was now seen as an enigma, a force to be approached with respect. Some factions saw potential for alliance, others a cautionary example, but all knew one thing for certain: Terran space was inviolable, a realm where humanity's word was law, and where those who crossed it found themselves faced with consequences they had not anticipated. What had started as a simple act of defense had evolved into a reputation that would reshape galactic dynamics. Humanity had not sought power or dominance, but the galaxy had, willingly or unwillingly, granted it to them. Terran space, once overlooked and unassuming, was now regarded with wary reverence. And humanity, once thought to be weak and unthreatening, had become the silent guardians of an order they had enforced with precision, caution, and an unyielding will. The galaxy understood now, without a doubt, to enter Terran space uninvited was to invite consequences that could not be outrun. In the end, humanity had achieved something greater than victory over invading forces. They had carved out a place of respect and influence among species that were once strangers. Terran space had become a sanctuary, not because of its defenses alone, but because of the integrity and courage of those who defended it. And as humanity moved forward, building connections, expanding alliances, and maintaining a vigilant watch over the borders they held dear, the galaxy watched and listened, learning with each encounter that there was far more to the humans than met the eye. In the wake of the Alvarax incident, and the formalized alliance with the consortium, humanity's position in the galaxy transformed rapidly. Formerly regarded with a mix of curiosity and underestimation, humans were now seen as both defenders and enforcers, a role that carried as many challenges as it did advantages. The new diplomatic alliances established by humanity were strong but relied on constant vigilance. Maintaining this balance without imposing authority over others was a line humanity intended to tread carefully. This strategy soon put humanity in the crosshairs of other powerful factions watching their rising influence with a wary eye. The first challenge to this newfound balance came from the Raloth Dominion, a faction that considered itself the governing authority of the known galaxy. The Dominion saw humanity's protective stance as a growing threat to their dominion, a form of governance they enforced through subtle intimidation and manipulation. Where the consortium had seen cooperation with humanity as beneficial, the Dominion saw a destabilizing force. If humanity continued to expand their influence and diplomatic networks, they feared they might erode the Dominion's decades-old hold over the more compliant, smaller species that fell under its protection. In response, the Raloth Dominion launched a covert campaign of misinformation and targeted disruptions aimed at weakening humanity's alliances. They whispered to other species, painting humanity as an unpredictable wildcard, too idealistic to be trusted and too volatile to be allied with safely. The Dominion began framing Terran actions as signs of imperial ambition, suggesting that humanity was merely building up power to one day seize control. In quiet diplomatic channels and meetings, Dominion envoys urged species to question humanity's intentions, stirring fears of an eventual Terran empire imposing its own standards on an unwilling galaxy. Unfazed, humanity responded not with force but with transparency. human diplomats worked closely with the consortium to counter the Dominion's whispers, openly sharing information and reinforcing the peaceful intentions behind every alliance they established. Where the Dominion relied on secrecy and indirect control, humanity leaned into an honesty that disarmed many of the rumors before they could fully take root. In public forums, Terran representatives reiterated that Terran space was a sanctuary, not a fortress, dedicated to the ideals of mutual respect and defense, not conquest. This approach began to unravel the Dominion's web of influence, showcasing that humanity could counter even underhanded tactics with a brand of open resilience. But the Dominion's provocations did not end there. Frustrated by their inability to sway public opinion, the Raloth Dominion attempted a more direct approach. They orchestrated a simulated attack on consortium territory, hoping to frame it as a Terran offense. Dominion operatives deployed drones to fire on a small consortium research outpost while planting false Terran communication logs that implicated humanity in the assault. The Dominion calculated that a public scandal would sever the consortium-Terran alliance for good. However, their plan backfired. The consortium, now more familiar with humanity's technological signatures, quickly identified discrepancies in the data and reached out to Terran officials before assuming the worst. Together, the consortium and Terran intelligence services launched a counter-investigation that not only disproved the falsified attack but traced the operation back to the Raloth Dominion's highest offices. This exposed attempt at deceit not only solidified the Terran consortium alliance but also sparked a wave of outrage among neutral factions. Dominion influence waned as its reputation suffered, all while humanity's standing rose yet again, showing the galaxy that they could respond to dishonesty with patience and precision rather than escalation. However, humanity's steady rise continued to draw attention, and eventually, one of the galaxy's most ancient powers, the mysterious Vasher Collective, took note. The Vasher Collective was a civilization wrapped in secrecy, known for its advanced technology and its policy of complete isolation from the galaxy's political affairs. For centuries they had kept to themselves, developing a near-mythical reputation. Yet something about humanity's growing prominence piqued their interest. They began dispatching emissaries and probes to observe the Terran territories, initiating cautious but steady contact with human diplomats. The Vasher Collective's envoys approached humanity with an invitation to a secluded world deep within their territory, a rare honor, as few had ever been granted access to their inner regions. The invitation was viewed with both awe and caution by other species, and humanity itself approached it with a blend of curiosity and wariness. The Terran government carefully selected a delegation of scientists, diplomats, and cultural historians to journey to the Vasher world. Once there, the humans discovered a society that, while technologically superior, shared surprising similarities in core values: respect for life, intellectual pursuit, and a preference for peaceful coexistence where possible. The meetings that followed were groundbreaking. The Vasher envoys, fascinated by humanity's balanced approach to power and influence, admitted that they had long watched other factions rise and fall, often succumbing to the temptation of dominance and subjugation. Humanity's ability to wield strength without imposition intrigued the Vasher, who confessed to seeing echoes of their own ancient journey toward ethical governance in the Terran approach. Over time, the Vasher Collective and humanity shared technological insights and philosophical discussions that went far beyond typical diplomatic exchange, creating a unique bond between the two civilizations. Through this connection with the Vasher, humanity gained not only knowledge but a new level of respect across the galaxy. The Vasher rarely endorsed other species, and their alliance with humanity sent a powerful message. It was a seal of approval that lent even more legitimacy to Terran influence and practices. For the first time, the galaxy at large saw humanity not merely as defenders but as pioneers of a new form of intergalactic interaction, a species unafraid to meet the unknown with curiosity, strength, and respect. However, humanity's position as an emerging pillar of galactic stability soon brought challenges from factions that feared their own status would be diminished. Even as allies and new trade partners welcomed humanity's fair practices, a coalition of powerful, established factions, the same ones that had exploited smaller civilizations for centuries, began to mount a united front, pooling resources to resist what they saw as the Terran influence, spreading across star systems. These factions saw no benefit in diplomacy with humanity, as it undermined their ability to manipulate and extract from weaker systems. Instead of engaging in an outright military response, humanity focused on reinforcing their alliances and expanding defensive partnerships with neighboring systems that were eager to avoid falling under the Old Guard's exploitative practices. The coalition responded by imposing blockades and manipulating economic channels to cut off supplies to Terran allies, hoping to strain the alliance's resources and create enough pressure to fracture their unity. In this dire situation, the Terran leadership enacted a strategic move that caught everyone off guard. Rather than escalating the situation or retaliating, humanity turned to the Vasher and the Consortium, leveraging these alliances to create a new trade network that bypassed the coalition's control. Through a mixture of technological innovation and collaborative agreements, humanity and its allies forged trade routes that were faster, safer, and independent from traditional, monopolized channels. This ingenuity not only sustained Terran allies but also attracted neutral factions previously undecided about engaging with humanity. The coalition's attempt to isolate humanity and its allies ultimately failed, as their stronghold on the galactic economy loosened. Not only did the Terran-led alliance endure, but it thrived, setting a new standard for cooperation, transparency, and mutual benefit in trade. The Old Guard, with their stranglehold weakened, watched as their influence dwindled and humanity's reputation only grew stronger. Even more tellingly, smaller systems and factions that had long been oppressed by the coalition began rallying around humanity, seeing Terran space as a place where fairness and protection were not simply promises but realities. By the end of these tumultuous interactions, humanity had achieved what few species ever had, a respected and steadfast position as a stabilizing force in the galaxy. Without seeking dominance, they had become a model for other factions, their influence shaping diplomatic practices and fostering a culture of mutual respect. The original perception of humans as harmless was now long gone, replaced by the understanding that humanity's commitment to peace was not a weakness, but a choice, one they would uphold through wisdom, unity, and strength. In the galaxy's many histories, humanity's rise would be recorded as a defining chapter, an era that marked a shift from fear and conquest to cooperation and alliance. To enter Terran space now meant entering a region defined by resilience and integrity, where actions had consequences and words held meaning. Humanity's journey from overlooked newcomers to respected guardians had redefined what was possible in interstellar relations, leaving a legacy that even the most powerful factions could no longer ignore or dismiss.